So it seems like maybe, kind of, sort of, Joe Biden's dominance as the front runner is starting to slide. Hopefully it starts sliding rapidly. Maybe the debates will, help shed light on the conservative that he is. A lot of people who support Joe Biden, they're supporting him, one, because I think there is a generational gap within the Democratic Party base. Older people like Biden, younger people like Bernie. But two, a lot of people support Biden because they believe he's just more electable against Donald Trump. So if you really want to make an appeal to those people, you've got to let them know that they are playing with fire. And my hopes was that Bernie would scream this at the top of his lungs. Listen, if you care about electability, are we really going to put up someone who's similar to the conservative we put up in 2016? Are we going to do the same thing again? Trot out another centrist Democrat who won't energize anyone, who won't excite new voters to come out and vote, and who will probably lose to Donald Trump? Are we really going to do that again? So I've been desperate to hear Bernie make this case and make it passionately and make it loudly, right? And he needs to name drop Joe Biden. He's kind of been dancing around it in a way by saying, look, we need someone who can excite the base, but he needs to be very clear in saying Joe Biden is not more electable contrary to popular belief. Joe Biden is another Hillary Clinton, and you risk losing to Trump if you nominate another centrist. So he finally really said this.
If the Democratic Party selects Joe Biden as its nominee, would it be making the same mistake that it did in picking Hillary Clinton, who lost to Donald Trump?
I fear that it could be. I really do. I fear that you would have a campaign without a lot of energy, without a lot of excitement. Could Joe beat Trump? Yeah, I think he could. I'm not saying that he can't. But I think, we don't want to make the same mistake that we made last time. And sometimes this is where the establishment talks to itself. I think that what the American people want right now is not only defeating Donald Trump, they want a candidate to speak to the pain that millions of people are feeling right now, and to get those people involved in the political process to stand up and fight back so that we can improve the lives of all people in this country.
Naomi Klein once said on The Young Turks, if we just get rid of Trump, we'll be back to a situation that was so bad it created Trump.
She's exactly right. That's exactly the point. And that is, look, we all want to beat the worst president in American history. No ifs, buts, and maybes about it. And I will support, if I lose this thing, I will be there doing everything I can to defeat Trump. But you want to address the reasons why Trump got elected in the first place. What was that? It's because for too long the Democratic establishment has ignored the needs of working people all over this country. People work longer hours for low wages. 40 million people living in poverty. The only major country not to guarantee health care to all people is a right. A vigorous effort to combat climate change, dealing with criminal justice reform, immigration reform. Those are issues that are not only the major issues facing this country, income and wealth inequality. How do you not talk about that? We have got to talk about that because it's the right thing to do, and it's the way you win an election.
So that was such a good question that Cenk Uygur asked. If I were able to ever get Bernie on my show, and that hadn't already been asked, I would have asked that question. Because what Bernie Sanders said there, he needs to repeat that over and over and over again. People want a candidate that can speak to the pain that millions of people are feeling now, and we need to address the reasons that got us to Trump in the first place. If Bernie Sanders started talking very loudly about this, I think that could potentially draw in some of the people who are voting primarily on the basis of electability. And a quote from Cenk in this is, he says, Naomi Klein once said, if we just got rid of Trump, we'll be back to a situation that was so bad it created Trump. That was so poignant. Because he's got to make this case. Look, going back to the pre-Trump era, that's not going to give anyone economic stability. It's not going to make the country better. Because if you don't take care of these underlying conditions that facilitated the rise of a demagogue like Donald Trump, we're going to get another demagogue like Donald Trump. One thing, though, that Bernie said that was wrong is he said, we all want to beat the worst president in American history. Now, I get why he would say this, because Trump could be his potential opponent, but just objectively speaking, Trump is not the worst president in American history. We just had George Bush. George Bush is measurably worse than Donald Trump in a plethora of ways. But with that being said, if I'm Bernie, would I call Trump the worst president in American history? I probably would, just for the sake of being strategic, because there are a lot of anti-Trump Democrats who will just vote on the basis of being anti-Trump. So I think that it is important to point that out. Now, another question that he was asked along those lines is, what happens if Democrats do what they did to you again? If we see another 2016, because they're already trying it. You see these Stop Sanders Democrats. You see them holding private meetings. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Neera Tanden, Terry McAuliffe, Pete Buttigieg, and they're trying to figure out what to do about Bernie Sanders. So here's what he had to say about that.
Now, you mentioned there that if you don't win the primary, you'll support whoever the Democratic candidate is, and you get asked that question all the time. What I've noticed is that the other candidates don't get asked that question of whether they'll support you. But the New York Times had a very interesting story about how some Democratic donors are going to dinners to work to make sure that you lose. Now, those are Democratic donors, not Republican donors. And now, even more controversially, and this is not me, it's the New York Times. They said Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Pete Buttigieg, and Terry McAuliffe were at some of those dinners. Does that put a lie to party unity?
Well, I'll let the individuals you name speak for themselves. But, two things. I think we are going to win the Democratic primary. And I think at the end of the day, we will have the support of Democrats across the board. They may not be, the Democratic establishment and the big money donors may not be excited about a Bernie Sanders presidency, but I hope and believe they will be far more supportive of me than they would be of seeing Donald Trump get reelected.
Are you a little worried that some of the Democratic donors will betray the Democratic Party if you're the candidate or any progressive is the candidate and support a third party and allow or at least risk Trump winning?
Cenk, at this unbelievably dangerous moment in American history, I have a hard time believing that anybody with any sense at all would do anything to see that Trump remains in the White House. Because if he does, democracy itself is being threatened. Certainly, there'll be no serious effort to deal with the global crisis of climate change, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know the answer, but I hope very much that enormous pressure would be put on anybody who claims to be a Democrat, who would think for one moment of doing anything that would aid Donald Trump.
So I take it that what he's saying there, maybe he's saying that to save face. Maybe his feelings are different. But he says, I'm not really worried about being betrayed by the establishment and Democratic donors. I really hope that he doesn't actually feel this way because it's fairly naive. And I'm not saying that because I think Bernie Sanders is naive overall. And I suspect that he's saying this just to save face. But you have to anticipate that they want to fuck you over because they do. They absolutely do. Now, he kind of left the door open on, this question here. Quote, I don't know the answer, but I hope very much that enormous pressure would be put on someone who identifies as a Democrat that would aid Donald Trump. I don't know. I am not too sure about that. I think you're going to see a lot of moderates, if Bernie were to win, support someone like Howard Schultz or vote third party or even Donald Trump. So I think that he should be as loud in calling for people to unify behind him preemptively as everyone else is being, loud in calling for him to unify behind someone else. Because nobody asks Joe Biden, will you endorse Bernie and unify behind Bernie and campaign for Bernie? Nobody does. It's always posed to Bernie. So why is the onus on Bernie for party unity when the Democrats are the one who are trying to undermine him and they're the ones being divisive? So these are really fantastic clips here. I'm going to link you to the full interview. These are phenomenal questions. Cenk has been on a roll with these interviews lately. So watch the whole thing because it was absolutely fascinating. These were great questions, and I'm glad that Bernie Sanders seems to be on the right track in terms of strategy. I guess I want him to be more direct in calling out Democrats if he sees any meddling, because if you don't, then they're going to do it more openly and try to get away with it. So he needs to call them out and make them fearful so they don't do that, so that way they don't want to do it, so they feel as if they won't be exposed by Bernie.